Hi, I'm Delaney Monroe. I hadn't been home in 8 years. Not since the last fight, the last slammed door, the last time my mother said, "You always make things harder than they need to be." But when my father died, I flew back without hesitation. Not because I forgave them, but because some part of me still wanted something. Closure. Recognition. A seat at a table I'd been pushed away from long before I ever left. The Monroe estate hadn't changed. White columns, brick steps, the smell of pine and magnolia. Wealth clung to everything like humidity. But the warmth that was supposed to come with it, that was gone. Or maybe it was never there. The funeral was as cold as the air conditioning, inside the chapel. People whispered in clusters, all pearls and pressed collars, like grief was a networking event. I stood quietly in the back, hands clasped, watching the back of my mother's hat as the minister spoke about legacy and honor and Southern strength. No one asked me to speak. I didn't expect them to. After the service, my brother Mitchell found me near the staircase, holding a glass of water I hadn't touched. "Hey, Del," he said, like we were still close, like I wasn't the sister he hadn't spoken to in almost a decade. "Got a quick favor to ask. Just a little thing, to help the estate stuff move faster." He handed me a pen and a set of papers already tabbed with sticky notes. "It's just some cleanup stuff, transfers. Dad wanted it smooth." I glanced at the header. It was legal. Estate documents, notarized lines, quiet language that could say everything or nothing at all. Mitchell smiled. "You trust us, right? We're family." That word, family, it felt weaponized in his mouth. I nodded once, silent, and signed. The pen moved before I could think, before I could remember that trust was a currency I hadn't had in this house since I was 19. He patted my arm like a boss thanking his assistant. "Appreciate you, really." Then he was gone. I stood there, papers signed, glass still full, wondering why it felt like something irreversible had just happened. Later we gathered for the post-service reception. Finger sandwiches, iced tea in crystal glasses. People I hadn't seen since I wore braces and silence like armor. They smiled like I was scenery. Like my success, a company acquired at 33, a feature in ink, was trivia, not triumph. They asked about my flight, not my life. My mother didn't hug me. She touched my shoulder like she was checking fabric. "You look thin," she said. "I'm fine." Her eyes flicked to the catering table. "Eat something." It was less concern than command. Like nourishment was obedience, like grief should be orderly, polite, and perfectly portioned. In the sitting room, I found a photo on the mantel, a recent family portrait. My mother, Mitchell, his wife, their twins, even my cousin Ava, who once tried to frame me for cheating in high school. Everyone was there. Everyone except me. My stomach went cold. Not surprised. Just hollow. I held the frame in my hand, studying the edges. The way they all leaned in. The way the space where I might have stood was filled with a ficus plant instead. They'd literally replaced me with decorative greenery. Behind me, someone cleared their throat. "Aunt Viv." "You know," she said, "Mitchell's taken on a lot since your dad got sick. It's been hard." I didn't respond. He's done his best. They all have. I looked at her then. I wasn't asked to help. She gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Well, you were busy. With your little business and all. My little business paid for my house, my staff, and my peace." But I just nodded. That night, after the guests left, I walked through the halls alone. The walls still had the same paintings, same rugs, but my room, my childhood room, was unrecognizable, gutted, painted beige. Used for storage now. Boxes stacked to the ceiling, labeled with other people's names. Not one had mine. I sat on the edge of the old guest bed and stared at the mirror across the room. I barely recognized myself. Not because I looked different, but because I looked the same. Still bracing, still hoping for crumbs, still trying to be invited into a home I technically grew up in but never quite belonged to. That was the emotional blow. Not a slap, not a scream. Just the quiet realization that I wasn't even a ghost in this house. I was a memory they'd boxed up and pushed into a corner. Unlabeled, unclaimed, unwanted. They waited until the next morning to make it official. I was in the sunroom, sipping black coffee, the only thing anyone still remembered I liked. Evelyn stepped in like she hadn't been avoiding eye contact since the funeral. She wore pearls, with her blouse. Grief didn't touch her face. "There's a family meeting," she said, "in the study." I didn't ask what it was about. I already knew. The study still smelled like leather and dusted wealth. My father's desk was untouched, but the energy had shifted. Mitchell sat behind it like he'd inherited not just the house, but the title of patriarch. Lauren stood just behind him, hand on his shoulder. Aunt Viv and Uncle Ron were already seated. Evelyn took her place near the fireplace like she was Switzerland. Neutral, untouchable. Mitchell slid a folder across the desk toward me. "Just wanted to walk you through everything," he said, voice breezy. "So it's clear." The folder was thick, neatly tabbed, a revised will, titles, assets, and in the middle, highlighted, a clause I hadn't seen in the documents I signed the day before, a full waiver. My inheritance, gone. I stared at it, then looked up at him. "You told me this was just transfer paperwork." "It was," he replied smoothly. "You helped consolidate things. It's cleaner this way." "This says I gave up everything." He gave a casual shrug. "You're not staying. You've got your business, your life. We didn't think you'd want to be tied down with land management and taxes." "You didn't ask," I said, louder than I meant to. Lauren stepped in with that placating tone I'd always hated. "It wasn't adversarial, Delaney. It's about preserving what Dad built." "You mean taking it?" Mitchell leaned forward. "It's not about money. It's about legacy." That was it. The word that snapped something in me. "Legacy?" I said, the edge in my voice sharp now. "You sold out Dad's legacy the moment you tricked me into signing it away. You didn't preserve a damn thing. You just grabbed what you could while he was dying." Evelyn stiffened. "Delaney, that's enough." "No," I said. "No, it's not." Her voice dropped, low and controlled. "You always blow things out of proportion." That stopped me. That sentence. It was the same one she used when I told her Dad was drinking too much when I was 13. The same one when I told her Mitchell threatened me behind closed doors when we were teens. "You always blow things out of proportion." I laughed, quiet, bitter. Mitchell tried to cut in. "Look, we didn't mean for it to feel unfair. You forged a will and handed me a pen like it was a birthday card. You signed it," Lauren said flatly. I looked at her then. "So that's the game? Technically, it's my fault, because I trusted my own family not to deceive me." No one answered. I could feel my heartbeat in my ears, but I wouldn't give them more. Not here. Not yet. I closed the folder and handed it back. Then I left. I wandered upstairs and walked the portrait hallway. It wasn't just omission. It was replacement. My father's favorite photo of us at the county fair, the one where we're both holding funnel cake and laughing, gone. Replaced by a shot of Mitchell and his family in front of the estate, posed like a magazine ad. My diploma photo? Gone. My graduation shot with Dad's hand on my shoulder? Gone. Even the childhood picture of me and Evelyn on the porch swing vanished, replaced with a framed painting of a goddamn pheasant. I wasn't just excluded. I was deleted. That night, Evelyn insisted we have a formal dinner. Said it would be good for closure. She had the staff set the long oak table. Everything sparkled, like nothing was broken. I was seated at the end. Not the head, not even close. Across from a cousin who once said I'd end up alone with a cat and a lawsuit. Nobody asked what I wanted to drink. A waiter filled my glass with red wine I never touched. Conversations floated past me like I was smoke in the corner. Mitchell laughed about renovations. Lauren brought up private school applications for their twins. Aunt Viv asked Evelyn how. She was holding up, as if Evelyn was the one who lost everything. No one asked how I was. I placed my napkin in my lap. Folded it once, twice, over and over. Then Mitchell raised his glass. To keeping it in the family, he said. The others echoed him like a rehearsed chorus. To legacy. To tradition. To Dad. I lifted my glass a second too late. It didn't matter. I didn't matter. Then, between bites of dessert, something plated like it cost more than my flight, Mitchell leaned back and said it. You know, Del got out just in time. Before things got complicated, she doesn't have to deal with any of this real work. Laughter. Familiar. Dismissive. Aunt Viv chimed in. She always was the independent one. Lauren added, This house was never really your speed. Then, Mitchell again. We just sold the east lot last week. Finally in the hands of real family. That stopped the clinking. I set down my fork. Stood up slowly. Every eye on me. The real family? I said. Mitchell blinked. Don't be dramatic, Del. I took a breath. You erased me from Dad's will, deleted every photo of me from the walls, called my absence a relief, and now you toast to family like it's a brand deal. Delaney. Evelyn warned, voice sharp. I turned to her. No, I'm done sitting quietly while you sip wine and smile like you didn't let them carve me out of my own bloodline. Aunt Viv leaned in, trying to smooth it over. Delaney, don't ruin the night. Your father wouldn't want this. Don't speak for him, I said, my voice shaking. He called me. He knew. He tried to tell me before it was too late. Mitchell stood, palms raised like he was still in control. Del, let's not make a scene. It's already a scene, I said. You just didn't think I'd speak. Silence. Table wide. The kind that exposes every mask, every knife passed off, as a compliment. I sat back down, slow and deliberate. Not to shrink, but to reclaim space. No one spoke for a long moment, but I could feel it. That shift. They weren't sure what version of me had just stood up. And for the first time, neither was I. Because something inside me had changed. This wasn't about grief anymore. It was about identity, and I would not be buried with him. I didn't sleep that night. Not out of anger, just clarity. I lay in the guest bed, listening to the ceiling fan spin, one slow circle at a time. Thinking about how many years I'd spent trying to earn a place that was never mine to begin with. Thinking about how grief, for me, had always arrived in silence, not tears, and how silence, I'd learned, could also be a weapon. I hadn't come back for closure. Not really. I came because I already knew something was wrong. A week before my flight, my father's former attorney called me. Someone they stopped using after he got sick. He said he saw the estate filings, and they didn't match what he and my father drafted together just months before he passed. He emailed me a copy of the original will. The real one. The one where I was listed equally, same as Mitchell. The one where a separate trust had been established in my name, independent from the rest of the estate, held under third-party management. Untouchable. The one no one in that house had mentioned. 2 weeks before my father died, He left a voicemail. I'd listened to it a dozen times, the rasp in his voice etched in my chest. Laney. Things are getting messy. Mitchell's pushing, just trust what we talked about. The file's in the desk, top drawer. That's all he said. That's all I needed. I had the will, the dates, the voice recording, the trust fund confirmed and protected, the estate accounts frozen under suspicion of undue influence. I wasn't just a daughter anymore. I was evidence. The next morning, I waited until they were all seated for breakfast. Same long table, same faces. Evelyn poured orange juice like nothing had shifted. Mitchell scrolled his phone. Lauren complained about fencing. Aunt Viv talked about gardenias. No one looked at me until I stood. I won't take up much of your time, I said. Forks paused. Glasses froze midair. I pulled a folded document from my bag and laid it flat in the center of the table, directly in front of Mitchell. A notarized copy of my father's original will. I just wanted to clear up a few things. Mitchell barely glanced at it. What is this? The version of Dad's will you forgot to destroy, I said, letting the words land. The real one, and the trust fund he set aside, still active, still mine. Lauren reached for it, flipping through fast. Her face went pale. Evelyn's hand hovered midair, sugar spoon shaking. You forged a narrative, I continued. I brought receipts. Aunt Viv's voice cut in, brittle. Delaney, this isn't necessary. No, I said louder. What wasn't necessary was rewriting history. I reached into my bag again, pulled out a small flash drive, and set it down beside the will. Then I pressed play on my phone. My father's voice echoed through the dining room speaker, low and labored but unmistakable. Mitchell, don't do this to Laney. She deserves what we agreed. It's in the desk. You promised. A full 6 seconds of silence followed. Mitchell's hand shot out, slamming the table. Turn that off. Lauren's voice cracked. What is this? How did you even get... Evelyn sat down hard, her breath caught in her throat. Stop, she whispered. Just stop. I didn't. I let the message finish. Then I tucked the phone back into my bag. This isn't a performance anymore, I said, voice steady. It's a reckoning. Mitchell stood up. You think you can tear this family apart with this? With tricks? No, I said calmly. You did that long ago. Lauren pointed at the flash drive. This doesn't prove anything legal. I turned to her. You're right. That's why the lawyers have the full file. This is just for context. I met Evelyn's eyes then. She looked older than yesterday, smaller. You didn't protect him. You didn't protect me. You just stood there. She said nothing. I reached into my purse once more and pulled out something small and silver. Dad's watch. The one he wore every Sunday to church. The one Evelyn claimed was lost. I found this in the top drawer, just like he said. Mitchell's eyes locked on it. He told me he wanted that. No, I said. He told me it was mine. I set it down on the will, beside the USB. Then I walked to the family portrait wall, the one they'd redone to erase me, and I found the only photo they'd missed. A sun-faded frame at the end of the hall. Dad and me on the porch swing. I'm 10, barefoot. He's holding my hand. I took it off the wall, carried it back to the table. This is the one thing you can't rewrite, I said, placing it in front of Mitchell. He didn't look at it. No one did. I looked at the table one last time, this shrine of denial and sugar-coated betrayal. Then I turned and walked out. No raised voices. No dramatic exit line. Just the sound of my footsteps and the truth in their silence. I didn't take their name, their legacy, their apology. I took what mattered and left what didn't. I didn't hear from them for 2 days. Then Evelyn called, not to ask how I was or to acknowledge what they'd done, but to clarify things before it all gets out of hand. Her voice was calm, clipped, rehearsed, like she was managing a headline. "You know how this looks," she said. "I just don't want the family name dragged into anything unflattering." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Silence, I've learned, has gravity. It makes people hear themselves more clearly. They sent follow-up emails, a few lukewarm apologies, some legal speak about amending things, starting fresh. I deleted them all. I wasn't interested in vengeance. I wasn't even angry anymore. Just done. Instead, I made one quiet call to the trust manager. Asked him to release a portion of the funds to a project I'd been thinking about since the funeral. 2 months later, a memorial garden was built, just outside the county library my father used to take me to when I was little. It's small, peaceful, shaded with oak. There's a plaque with his name on it, and a bench beside the fountain that reads, "In memory of those who grew quietly." They weren't invited to the dedication. I didn't need them to clap. I just needed something real. I still grieved. Of course I did. Grief doesn't need permission. But I grieved honestly this time. Not for the family I lost, but for the girl I had to become to survive them. And every day that I didn't go back, every time I chose peace over performance, the ache became a little less sharp. They always said I walked away too easily. They never realized walking away was the hardest thing I ever had to learn.